Do we welcome God into our homes, or only the parts of God we're comfortable with? What if hospitality means giving up control, not just offering a seat at the table? Keep these questions in mind as you listen to this episode of Your Week with St. Luke's, your weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture, to learn God's story, so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. This is the final episode in the series on 2 Kings, and once again we're joined by our friend, Dr. Ryan Bonfiglio from the Candler Foundry. Let's jump into the conversation. All right, well, welcome back. Pastor Jenn and Liz are here again with one of our good friends, Ryan Bonfiglio from the Candler Foundry.
Hi, everyone.
So we are finishing off this series on 2 Kings. So we're still in chapter 4 like last week, but we're moving on just a little bit of ahead in the story, starting at verse 8. So Jenn, do you want to read that for us?
I will do that. Okay. One day, Elisha went to Shunem, and a rich woman lived there. She urged him to eat something. So whenever he passed by, he would stop there to eat some food. She said to her husband, "Look, I know that he is a holy man of God, and he passes by regularly. Let's make a small room on the roof. We'll set up a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him there. And then when he comes to us, he can stay there." So one day, Elisha came there, headed to the room on the roof, and lay down. He said to his servant, Gehazi, "Call the Shunammite woman." And Gehazi said to her, and she stood before him. Elisha then said to Gehazi, "Say to her, look, you've gone to all this trouble for us. What can I do for you? Is there anything I can say on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army?" She said, "I'm content to live at home with my own people." Elisha asked, "So what can be done for her?" Gehazi said, "Well, she doesn't have a son and her husband is old." Elisha said, "Call her." So Gehazi called her, and she stood at the door. Elisha said, "About this time next year, you will be holding a son in your arms." But she said, "No, man of God, sir, don't lie to your servant." But the woman conceived and gave birth to a son at the same time the next year. This was what Elisha had promised her.
I love that. No man, no sir, not me.
Not gonna
It's a little
happen.
bit like what I said when I found out I was having another child.
Well,
Too close to home on that one.
that's right. It's a well-worn biblical trope of women who are not expecting, being expecting.
Which is
It feels a
hard.
little bit like last week's too, right? Where he's kind of out in the community with everyday people here.
Yeah, that's right. Remember, there were like these two types of stories in Elisha's narrative. One where he's confronting kings about justice and unfair systems. And then there's another set of story where he's kind of like on the ground, out with people experiencing poverty, dealing with their everyday realities. And this is one of those other stories, those kind of on the ground with the people experiencing poverty stories. And it feels really similar or has some points of connection to the story from last week. In both cases, there's a woman who plays a central role. Although in this case, the woman isn't experiencing poverty as she was last week. This is a woman of some financial means. So the story has switched a little bit. It's still on the ground, but now this isn't so much about poverty. It's about abundance, though, still in many ways. But now it's the woman who is giving the abundance, not the prophet.
Okay, so everyone at St. Luke's knows that I have a geographic literacy problem today, as well as biblically. So where is Shunem? Tell me about where she's from.
Yeah, great question. You're not alone, Jen.
Thank you.
Most of us don't know where these places are in when we read the Bibles, and it's totally understandable. So let me give you a little geographical orientation. Shunem is in this place about halfway up north-south of ancient Israel, and it's in a place called the Jezreel Valley. Now, the Jezreel Valley is kind of like the breadbasket of ancient Israel. It was the most fertile land, had the best rainfall. This is where kind of the agricultural abundance would have originated. And really, it's not far off from Nazareth, the place we know where Jesus was born. In fact, if you go to Nazareth today, from the heights, you can actually look out and see the very place that the ancient town of Shunem would have once stood. So, in either case, this little town seems to be a place that the prophet passes through quite often. Now, the question is why? Why was he always going by Shunem? Well, the text doesn't tell us, but I have a guess about that. This area, this place called Shunem, would have been on the path from Elisha's hometown, a place called Abel Meholah, to Samaria, which was the capital city of northern Israel, and it's exactly where the royal palace would have been. So if you imagine Elisha as a king maker and breaker, kind of traveling each day to the king's palace, he would have gone past Shunem every single time he made that trip to the king's palace. And so I think he had quite a bit of familiarity with this town, and we can imagine that he might have often stopped over along that journey from his hometown to Samaria, almost exactly in this place.
So I find this story fascinating, and I like to use it with my husband because, like, when people come to visit, I don't want to just, make the room nice for them. I want to like change the whole house, which is what they do. They're not just offering him hospitality. They're literally like transforming the house for this guy. They're making his own room for him. Why would they have done this?
Yeah, isn't that an amazing point about this story? They don't say, look, there's the fold-out bed, do the best you can. The bar hurts your back. They don't say, hey, go out to our second, storage room in the back. They say, no, let's recreate this house and create for you a space within it. Do you notice that little detail in the story? They have this little space above their living quarters, which, by the way, would not have been uncommon for a standard Israelite home. At about this time, they would have had sort of like a second level, maybe a ladder leading up to it. It would have been open, no walls, and it would have been for supplies, for some grain or other storage thing. But what they seem to do here is that they take that upper area and they make it into its own quarters. They build walls, they have furniture, they put a little lamp in there, there's a table and chair. And so what they've done is they've created space for Elisha right in the midst of their daily living space. He's not down the hall, third door on the right. He is right smack in the middle of where and how they live.
I love that. We all know hospitality is a good thing, right? I mean, it's one of our core values, right?
Right?
But this is kind of like what it means to be a follower of Jesus, right? But sometimes our way of being hospitable requires other people to adjust, or us to adjust too, right? Like even our customs and our habits and maybe our values. So sometimes we're like, we open our homes, but the people visiting don't necessarily feel like they belong, right? And I think we find that probably in the church too, right? So tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I think our tendency, so I think a lot of us get that hospitality is a good thing. I've never run into someone who says, yes, the goal of the Christian life is to be inhospitable as possible. But I think though we value hospitality, it runs into the limit set by our own willingness to adapt our environment and to adapt our homes and our places of belonging so that they become a place of belonging for someone else. Here's the metaphor that I think of. We sort of like this idea that we want that hospitality is inviting more people to the table. I hear this referenced a lot. And in many ways, that's a beautiful image. Yes, we want more people at the table. We want more diverse people at the table. But we often stop the metaphor there. And I think what this text challenges us to wonder is not only how do we invite more people to the table, but how do we need to reinvent the table? How do we need to think differently about what food is served,
Right.
what the dishware is like, who sits where, when the meal happens? All of that probably needs to change in order for the person who we've invited to the table to feel like they actually belong at the table. And so often in church context, it's true of the academy as well, we just do the first part. How do we get more people to the table without thinking about how to recreate the table? And I think in some way, that's what we see this woman doing. They're reinventing their house so that it becomes a place of belonging, so that Elisha feels that he is at home when he stays in that room, that he's not just a guest in someone else's house, but he truly belongs there, that he is meant to be with them in their own ways of living.
isn't that really, I mean, we talk a lot around hospitality is not coffee and donuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Old Testament chesed and
Hmm.
that loving, faithful kindness. And isn't that what God continued from Genesis to Revelation to say is that I'm going to show you what that kind of hospitality, because I'm going to come to be with you
Hmm.
on your terms,
Hmm.
right? And even you even get that in the birth narrative,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Mary and Joseph, it is the Son of God that they're carrying, and God still allows Mary and Joseph to search for a place for Jesus to be born. They're wandering around Bethlehem with no place to stay. Um, and this is the Son of God. And
Yeah.
it shows us less about Mary and Joseph and the innkeeper and more about God being willing to come and move along to find space among us.
Yeah. And that story, that birth narrative you're referring to from Luke, um, I think it's one of those texts that should be very convicting to us in many levels, because we think of that story. I think as a little kid, I thought of that story as, the inn that they go to was like a Motel 6 or a Holiday Inn or something like that. And literally, when the people say there's no room at the inn, that means that they have about what, 50 rooms, and all of them are occupied. But actually, when you look really closely at that story, something a little bit different is happening. In the Greek, I know we geek out on our biblical languages sometimes in these podcasts, so let's go there. In the Greek, the word used for inn is not the typical word for inn. There is a good Greek word for that, and it's not used here. Rather, the word in this story is a word that refers to a space in an individual's home where a guest would have stayed. And it would have been right there in the middle of things, just like in the story of Elisha and the Shunammite woman. So, what Luke is showing us through the infancy story is not so much that Mary and Joseph came to this hotel and there simply was no vacancy. Rather, he's telling us that this vulnerable couple, they were young, they were unmarried, probably scared out of their minds, and that they were having this baby. They were not offered hospitality by the owners of this home or any home that they encountered. The message seems to be that there was no space for the holy couple in the midst of everyday life in Bethlehem. So, do you see the contrast here? The Shunammite woman creates space in the midst of her home to welcome the prophet Elisha, whereas in the story of the gospel, the people of Bethlehem refused to open space in their homes for Joseph, Mary, and the soon to be born Jesus. It's this kind of like wonderful pairing, but we have a reversal. And here, the sort of the correct model is not found in the New Testament, but it's found in the Old, in this story of a Shunammite woman.
Hmm.
Liz?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about.
I know, I am too, because I'm lost in the fact that I keep seeing the Shunammite woman as God, and in
Yeah,
this, and God rearranging God's self to be
yeah,
with us, and yeah, and making, yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
and
I
I'm
could go on
thinking
and
that
on.
we lack this ability or
yeah.
this
We
willingness
do,
to make room in our lives for Jesus. That's where you're taking me.
yeah,
Yeah, that's right. And we do it only to the extent we want to invite Jesus into the home. We're just not really willing and able to reinvent the home, to restructure how we live and where we live and our values and priorities. That's why this story I think is incredibly convicting. Because sure, I'm sure many of us have had examples where we feel like Mary and Joseph, and that we've not been given space in where in other places of belonging, whether they are churches or businesses or within families. But we also have to identify with the people who turned Mary and Joseph away and think, how and when have I done that? Now, maybe not always intentionally and certainly not maliciously, but where have we not been willing to make adjustments to the how we live, the patterns of our life, to allow Jesus space to inhabit where we're from and how we live?
And why do you think it's so hard for us to create space in our lives to just encounter others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's uncomfortable. I think it involves giving up some control. The Shunammite woman had to give up something. I mean, who knows? Maybe that was her favorite space in the house, up there on the second floor. and she has to give up something. She has to be open up to the possibility of the gift that will come, that they now get to share this home with someone who had become a friend and a close companion to them. She had to sort of let go of the certainty of the known structure of her life to receive the gift of this uncertain thing that would happen in the future. I think that's at least part of it.
Do you think there are other I, I'm sorry. I'm really sinking into this story, and I'm
Hmm.
thinking about it not only in the ways that we're inhospitable or hospitable to people, but the way again we are inhospitable to God and
Yeah.
inhospitable to Jesus because of course the whole love of neighbor. But this is about just radical hospitality and the acts of radical hospitality, which means I have to slow down and I have to notice others and not let them just be near me, but be with me. Like I keep coming back to the word of witness,
Hmm.
and create spaces for them to not belong just in my house, but belong in my pew, right? Or my table at Wednesday night dinner, but in my life.
Yeah.
Like what's the challenge? Why are we so challenged with that?
Well, two things come to mind, Jen, and maybe it's just me, but as a child of the late 70s, early 80s, I grew up on Bernstein Bears, which I generally love and read to Leo, my son, who's now 11. But I remember one of the stories from Bernstein Bears was Stranger Danger. And it was teaching kids how dangerous strangers were. Now, of course, there's some level in which, yes, little kids should not wander off in the grocery store and, God forbid, get in the car of a stranger or take candy from a stranger, right? So there's some practical, obvious, like, yes, one shouldn't do that. But I do think at some level, even beyond our youth, this stranger danger mentality sets in. That we come to project our fears, our insecurities, our anxieties on the people that we don't know or people who are not like us. And then they become this site of danger that we either have to avoid or we have to contain, and constrain them to a certain place in a certain way that we interact with them, such that if they're a point of danger, if we do let them into our homes, which we probably don't, we have to maintain control of the situation. There's only so many places that they can go. In my grandmother's house, I've already referenced her. Um, she was very hospitable, but that hospitality ended at the kitchen. You didn't move past the kitchen and into the formal living room. And I think that we kind of approach hospitality in that guarded way sometimes, that you're okay here, just not into the rest of my life. I think that's one of the problems that we run into.
Do you think that's why Elisha responded the way he did? It's because he wasn't used to it. I mean, he's like, well, what do you like? He's
Yeah, I
Elisha responds in a way that is just it's beautiful.
gosh, that's making me think of this passage in a different way, right? He is overwhelmed in a certain way by this generosity, and I wonder, Jan, if that's because he's used to being on the other end of things. He's used to being the giving one, the one who opens up space, who gives abundance, who participates in the miracles that God is delivering to overcome scarcity with abundance. And now he is the recipient, right? The roles are reversed here, and I wonder if that's what we're seeing happen.
Do you think that's why he asked her, "What can I do for you?" I mean, he sends his servant to kind of have this back and forth, like how can I repay you?
Yeah, isn't that interesting that he sort of like defaults into this transactional mode? It seems like maybe because he's always giving gifts, maybe he's having a hard time receiving this gift. And he thinks that, okay, if she's given me this, what's the payback? What's the quid pro quo here? How do I restore and make whole this relationship? Because I can't simply be the recipient of someone else's generosity. And this is where I love the woman's response. It's a little bit awkward in the language, but she's just like, basically, what do I need? Like, I don't need to have some place among kings. I don't need your favor or your influence. The gift was enough. It does not need to be returned with a favor or privileged access. Like the gift truly is one of grace. And that's what grace is all about. It's a gift that's given that is not deserved and that does not require repayment. And we see it so extravagantly in the story of this woman.
Liz, you're thinking, I can tell.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts.
I do too. I do too. They're running in 20 different
Yeah,
directions.
it's a lot. And I keep wanting to go to the New Testament, but I'm trying to stay here,
No, go
right?
for it, Liz. We're good with that.
Yeah, but no, but so obviously the story doesn't end with her refusal though, right? Like Elisha persists, and then we find out that, she doesn't have a son, so she's gonna have one, which we already offered commentary on that, right? But
Yeah. And what I love about it, and I think one of the things that this story is showing us is that while there's not a transactional interaction between the woman and Elisha, it's not like I'm going to build you this room and you're going to give me this rent and we're going to be sort of in this financial relationship. There is nevertheless reciprocity. So the woman gives the gift undeserved and not in need of payment, and then Elisha gives a gift back. The miracle that happens is that this woman who is barren, presumably late into life, she is able to have a child. So that is something that Elisha participates in to give back to this woman. So both are receiving, both are giving, and in neither case is there an expectation of return. It's two freely giving gifts meeting each other in this amazing story.
And is there something to the fact that, I mean, because what did a child mean? Like, what would a child have meant to this barren couple in the Old Testament?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. I think a number of things. One, having children was always a sign of abundance and fullness, which we could problematize that at some level because I would want to be able to affirm that people who don't have children
Yeah,
today,
right.
either out of choice or out of biological situation, they still can experience abundance. They don't need to understand their lives without children as one of scarcity. But in the Old Testament world, children were a symbol of abundance. It was also a way that their social system and family structures began to expand. This was a wealthy family, and they might have been thinking about who would inherit this home and their property and their wealth. So I think in many ways it reflects a world in which children were seen as a blessing. And so in having this child, especially in old age, it would have been seen as something special, something miraculous even. And we kind of see it from the woman's response, right? She kind of she balks at it. It's like she's incredulous. Like, me? Have a child? It reminds me of the story of Sarah and Abraham. When God tells them that they'll have a child, Sarah just literally busts out laughing. And it's not like a good laughter. It's like a derisive, sarcastic laughter. Like, have you checked how old I am? I am not having a child. And of course, God's work in that story is to transform Sarah's laughter of unbelief into a child who's named Isaac. And in Hebrew, Isaac means he laughed. So literally, Sarah's laughter of disbelief becomes the laughter of a child that brings joy and blessing to the family.
Well, and I think of it as generationally too. I think it's this blessing of the generations and being able to extend that hospitality, that God-like hospitality gets passed on through the generations. And they have this ability to do that so that God's hospitality and faithfulness doesn't stop with the Shunammite woman, but it will continue on through her children and her descendants, and God's faithfulness and hospitality will continue. But it's funny that you bring up Abraham and Sarah, because they're the three strangers, right? That came, and that's where this whole like prophecy ended, because they extended the hospitality to strangers. So I'm feeling like we shouldn't extend hospitality or we'll get pregnant. I mean, what's going on here?
I don't think all hospitable acts end in pregnancy. Let
Okay,
me just
good,
put that
good.
disclaimer out there. But I do think what we see in these stories is that hospitality is kind of like a chain reaction,
Yeah.
right? Once experienced by one person, then you want to multiply it. You want to give it back. You want to make it manifest for other people. I've often wondered if Abraham and Sarah, as strangers in the land of Israel, because remember, they were not born there, they're from
Right.
another place, I wonder if they had not received hospitality from someone else.
Mm.
And now in Genesis 18, where we see them showing hospitality to strangers, that's them giving the gift out. And I wonder how it just rolls and multiplies from there. What did Elisha learn about hospitality from this story? What about the child that was born to the Shunammite woman? How does he come to embody and practice hospitality? There's a way in which once it gets rolling, hospitality builds a momentum that can honestly transform a community and transform a culture.
Well, and I think that's true with the church. I think that's what you see in the Acts church to move to the New Testament. The Acts
Mhm.
church, they shared everything. They held everything. It was really baptism was inviting people into this community that was hospitable by nature
That's right.
and faithful to one another by nature, and people wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
It was so transformational and not transactional like the rest of the world that it said every time that they looked, people were in awe and wanted
Yeah.
to be a part of that.
And that the numbers were growing. We see that in the early chapters of Acts, that it wasn't, yes, they were sharing the news of Jesus, but this was not like street corner evangelism and people were converting just by hearing about Jesus. They were being converted through the hospitality and generosity of that early church. They were experiencing something that was countercultural and disruptive and different, and it was magnetizing. It's what drew people into the body of Christ because they saw something in them, in their form of hospitality and generosity, that they wanted to experience and embody and return to others. And that's how that Pentecost movement grew the church from this little band of disorganized followers of Jesus into what has become a growing, flourishing body of Christ into the early centuries of the church.
But it was real hospitality,
Yeah.
genuine, like you belong to not just us, but you belong to me and I belong to you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it continues because people know it today. People know when you're fake. People know when the
Mhm.
hospitality extends as far as the parking lot or the welcome bag, but then they get in and nobody speaks to them
Yeah.
or
And
no
it
one
happens
cares
all
about
the
them.
time, Jen. And in some ways, it makes me wish that in the church we stopped talking about hospitality and not even like radical hospitality or great hospitality. Because in some ways, the challenge isn't just to be hospitable, the challenge is to show up long enough and persistent enough in the lives of other people and other communities that you get invited in as a guest. That's longer, harder work. I don't know what that word is, guest patality. I don't know, that doesn't sound quite
Mhm.
right. But I wish
Mhm.
that was our goal to say, yeah, that's one thing to invite people out there into our homes, but the really disruptive, the really courageous thing is to show up long enough to be invited into others' homes. And really, that's what we see happening in Jesus' ministry. Jesus actually is almost never the host. He's always the guest. And what it
Mhm.
takes to show up as a guest is actually quite different and more and harder than what it is to show up as the host. Because as the host, we retain control. And as the guest, we are the vulnerable ones, entering into the spaces of others and wondering how relationships can spring up from those unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable encounters.
That's beautiful.
I love that.
Absolutely. And that's why we say our core values, they go in a distinct order.
Hmm.
It is acceptance.
Hmm.
It's this hospitality and it's faithful, loving kindness
Yeah.
that is always there and protects. And then it's community, which if we're doing those three things, that makes me a better disciple. And then that informs how I serve.
And it makes you a better disciple, not just because it's the right thing to do. It's
No, it makes
morally
me
and
dig
ethically
in
sound,
deeper.
and it transforms us. When
Yes.
we show up in those hospitable ways, we walk away different.
Mhm.
Right.
That very act of hospitality is the transformational ingredient to our discipleship.
And when we say it transforms us, it's not that, oh, it makes me feel warm and feeling and I love God deeper and I love others. For me, when I do those things, when I accept in Christ's love, accept people, and I'm hospitable and welcoming and loving and kind, and I bring them into community with me, it shows me my sin. It shows me my prejudice. It shows me my growing edges, and then it makes me better at the service, the Christ-centered service, when I go out and serve other people.
Yeah, I love that. That's right on, Jen.
All right, Liz, we could, again, talk about this for hours because we love talking to Ryan.
I love talking to you guys. Let's do this in person next time.
Let's.
Yeah,
All right.
I
I'll
like
get out the
it.
date book. Old school. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you for being with us for this series.
Of
And
course.
we will hope to, we'll have to do some more Old Testament stuff, so we can keep bringing you. But thank you, friends, for being with us this week. We'll see you back here next week for yet another topic. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See ya.